The ice had a sound when she hit it. Not a crack, not a splash. Something between the two. A low, dead report, like a rifle muffled under a blanket. I was upstream maybe 60 yards, crouched on the bank with my horse behind me, filling the water skin. Morning. Shh. The Cheyenne River running low and hard-skinned that time of year, gray-green under the ice shelf that jutted out from both sides, leaving only a narrow black channel in the center where the current still moved. Cold enough that my breath came in short white bursts, and the mud on the bank had gone rigid underfoot. I heard the sound. I looked up. There was a shape in the water. A woman, face down, arms out. The dark current already pulling her past the shelf edge, already taking her toward the bend where the river narrowed, and the ice closed over completely. And nothing came back from. I do not remember making a decision. I remember the water. It hit me like a fist, not cold, something past cold, something that seizes every muscle and tells you to stop, to turn, to get out. And I kept moving because the current was faster than I'd thought, and she'd already gone under once and come back up, but her hands weren't moving right, weren't fighting, and I understood then that she had not fallen in. Someone had put her there. The stillness in her hands was not shock. It was surrender. I got my arm under her before the bend. I don't know how. The current was strong, and the ice shelf was slick, and I went under twice, and the second time I thought, this is how it ends, Chayton. This is a foolish death. But I had her by then. I had her coat in my fist, and I wasn't going to let go of it. I hauled us both up onto the shelf, and the ice screamed and held, and we lay there on the bank mud, both of us gasping, on her back and me on my hands and knees over her, like a man who has lost an argument with the river. She looked up at me. Her lips were the color of a bruise, her hair plastered flat, a cut above her left eye, old enough to have crusted, not from the river, from before, and her eyes. Dark, not frightened, watching me the way a person watches something they don't understand yet, measuring it, not flinching from it. She said something in a language I didn't know. I said, in English, "You're alive." She said something again, softer, and I didn't know those words either, but I knew the sound. It was not gratitude. It was something more like, I know. I got her to my fire. I got the wet clothes off her, and wrapped her in my blanket and my horse blanket over that, and fed the fire until the wood ran low, and then I broke. Up a deadfall I found 20 yards into the trees and fed it more. She shook for a long time. The deep, structural shaking of a body fighting to keep itself alive. The kind that goes into the teeth and the knees and the hands. That makes a person look like they might shake apart entirely. I held the blanket around her, because there was no other way to keep it in place, and because, I will say this plainly, the way I would say any plain thing, I did not want her to die. Not this woman. Not yet. Not before I knew who had put her in that river and why. I talked to her. Not because she could understand me. Because a voice helps. My mother taught me that when I was small. A voice is a rope, she said. And when a person is very far away inside themselves, a voice can be the rope they use to climb back. I don't know if that's true. I know. She stopped shaking around midday and fell asleep. And when she woke up, her eyes were clearer, and she looked at me and said a word, careful and deliberate, and held out her hand. I took it. She held on a moment, then she let go. Her name, I learned later that day, was Mullah. She was not American. That much was clear once she was warm enough to try more words. She tried 3 or 4 languages before she found one. I had a few words of a trading tongue, a mix of French and English and hand sign that moved up and down the river between the forts and the camps. Enough. We made ourselves understood badly, but enough. She was from somewhere east, very far east, she said, the name of the place, and I'd never heard it. She said it again, slowly, like a person trying to teach a word to someone who keeps mispronouncing it, and I tried to say it back, and she made a sound that might have been a laugh, except it was too tired. Malongi, she said. And then, touching her own chest, I understood that. Not a place, a name, hers or what she was called there, I said. Chayton. She said it back, nearly right. Better, Then I'd said hers. We stayed at that lodge 2 more days. The weather held us, which I said nothing about, and she said nothing about either. She wasn't well enough to travel hard, which was true enough. And the snow was coming sideways out of the north, which was also true enough. And neither of those things was the whole reason. I have thought about that since. The way a man can know something before he knows it. I kept that fire going bigger than I needed to, and I checked her color every hour, and on the second afternoon, when the storm let up briefly, and she was asleep, I went to the door of the lodge and looked out at the white and stayed there longer than I needed to before going back and sitting down. She woke while I was sitting there, looked at me a moment. Then she said, in the trading tongue, one of the words she'd found, warm. She touched the blanket, the fire. I said yes. She said, thank you. I said, sleep. She did. And I sat in the lamplight, listening to the snow and thinking, I don't know this woman. I know nothing about her except what a brutal hour has shown me. I know she didn't break when she should have. I know she looked up at me from the ice with those steady dark eyes, and the first word out of her mouth was not a cry and not a plea. Shh. I know she is eating and sleeping and recovering with an immersion that doesn't ask anyone's permission. That is not nothing. I need to tell you something about who I was then. Before I tell you what happened next, I was 43 years old. I had been a chief of my band for 11 years. Not a war chief, though I had fought. Not a peace chief, though I had negotiated. I was the kind of chief a band needs when it is very tired and very small, and the world is pressing in from all sides. The kind who makes decisions that no one thanks you for, until much later, if ever. The kind who is called steady by the men and cold by the women, and knows which one is more honest. My wife had been dead 4 winters. I am not going to talk much about her, only to say she was good. She died in the sickness that took the camp that winter, her and 2 of the children both. And what was left of me after that was functional, effective, but emptied of something I hadn't known I'd been carrying until it was gone, the way you don't notice the weight of water until you set the bucket down. The remaining children were grown or near it. I had arranged my life around usefulness. I ate when I needed to, slept enough, did the work. I had stopped letting myself want anything for myself alone and told myself this was discipline. The correct way for a man in my position to be. I had been telling myself that for 4 years. I had mostly come to believe it. So that is who was crouching by that fire, with a strange woman wrapped in blankets. A man who had forgotten, mostly, what it felt like to want something that wasn't on behalf of someone else. She stayed 4 days, at first, because she couldn't walk right. Her left ankle twisted, either in the river or before it, and then because the weather came down hard on. The second night, the kind of plains cold that simply announces itself and dares you to leave. I had a lodge nearby, set back in the trees. My band's winter camp was half a day's ride south. I'd come up to scout the river crossing for spring. I hadn't planned to be gone long. I hadn't planned any of this. On the 3rd day, she told me what had happened. She had come west with a man. A trader, she thought, hired to cook and keep camp for a long journey, working her passage. The work had been honest until it wasn't. Until she was far enough from any place, she knew that running had nowhere obvious to run to, and she understood too late that the man had other intentions. That she was going to be taken somewhere and sold somewhere, and that the whole transaction had been planned before she'd accepted the job. Before any of it, she had tried to run, caught her and beaten her. She said this the way she said everything else, just the facts, no performance, and tied her. She'd gotten loose in the night and run again, and he'd found her again 2 days later. At this river, and this time, he didn't beat her. He lifted her up and dropped her in and walked away. No anger. Just the easiest solution to a problem. She said this without a tremor. Sitting up, the blanket around her shoulders. Eating the dried meat I'd given her. Watching the fire. I listened without speaking. When she was done, I asked one question. Did she know the man's name? She told me. I knew it. Not personally, by reputation. The way you know the names of men who work in the dark spaces between the law and the land, who rely on the fact that their victims are never the kind of people anyone will go looking for, I said. He will not trouble you again. She looked at me. I said it again, different words, making sure it crossed the language. This man. He is done with you. I promise this. She was quiet a long moment then. You do not know where he is. I said, I will find him. She studied me, that measuring look. Then, why? It was a fair question. She was not my people. She was not anyone's people here. I had enough obligations already. My band, my land, the coming spring, the decisions waiting for me back at camp. I didn't need to add this. I thought about how to say it in the trading tongue, and I couldn't find the right words, so I said it in my own language, which she didn't understand, but I said it anyway, because no one else will, because you deserve someone who will, and because I am tired of carrying nothing that is mine. What she heard was just sounds. She asked me that question, why? And I have thought about it a great deal since then. Not because it was a hard question, but because the answer surprised me. A man like me, a man who has been carrying the weight of other people for truth, the better part of his adult life, who has learned to find his purpose in being useful, who has trained himself to measure a situation and identify what it needs, and provide it without being asked and without needing to be thanked. A man like that can lose track of himself. He wakes up one morning and he is 50% chief and 30% memory, and the rest is just habit. The actual person underneath all of that, the one who wanted things, the one who felt things as things, rather than as problems to be managed. That person gets thin from not being fed. I hadn't noticed it happening. You rarely do. The thinning is gradual, and the usefulness compensates for it. And you keep moving forward. And you tell yourself that this is what a life looks like. When it has been organized correctly, when the personal things have been set aside in favor of the necessary things, when you are not a man who indulges himself. But when she asked me why, something in me answered before I could arrange it properly. Something that had been waiting, patient and thin, said, because I want to. Because this matters to me. Because I have not done something for myself in 4 years, and this woman, whoever she is, deserves someone to do this for her. And I would like to be that person. That is what came up. Not duty, not obligation, not calculation, want. It startled me, honestly. Standing there in the cold with the fire between us and her, watching me with those steady dark eyes. The feeling of wanting something, simple and specific, was so unfamiliar that I almost didn't recognize it. What I said in my own language, and she heard the sounds and not the meaning, and that was fine. The meaning wasn't for her, not yet. It was for me. To hear myself say it out loud, even in words she couldn't follow. To let it be real for a moment, before I went back to being practical. But she watched my face when I said it. Something shifted in hers. Not relief, not gratitude, something quieter than either. Like a door opening a crack that had been shut a long time. I found the man. It took 2 days after she was well enough to ride south to my camp and into the care of the women there. I left her with Standing Rock woman who was old and had seen everything, and whose opinion of men who beat women was very clear and had been made plain to me when I was a much younger man doing a much smaller version of a stupid thing. Standing Rock woman looked at Mila when I brought her in. Then she looked at me. Then she made a short sound and turned around and said, over her shoulder, come inside and eat. Mila followed her. I went north. The trader was at a post 20 miles upriver, drunk, unworried. A man who dropped a problem in a river and considered it solved. I am not going to tell you the details of what happened at that post. Only that I went in through the front door, with 4 of my men, and I talked to trader the way you talk to a man when you want him to understand clearly and permanently that a particular thing is over. That his life from this moment forward would continue only on the condition that certain names, her name, this direction, this river, this woman, were never spoken or sought or thought about again. He understood. Men like him always understand, when the understanding is made simple enough. I came back to camp the morning of the fourth day, light snow falling. The kind that muffles everything. It's the world, smaller and quieter, lays itself down without urgency and covers the sharp edges. Standing Rock woman met me at the edge of camp and told me the band was well. The East hunters had come back with 2 elk, and the woman called Mila had helped with the cooking the night before and had slept well and had asked about me twice. I tied my horse and went to the fire. She was there, sitting with 2 of the younger women, piece of beadwork in her hands that someone had given her. She didn't know the pattern, but she was trying, watching the hands of the woman beside her and copying the motion. When she saw me, she stopped. Put the beadwork down. She stood up. She said my name. Just that, Chayton. Not a greeting, not a question. More like someone setting something down on solid ground after carrying it a long way and not quite believing the ground would hold. I said, "It's done." She knew those words. She crossed the space between us and stood in front of me, close, and she put both her hands flat on my chest, right at the center, and she looked up at me. She said something in her own language, not the trading tongue, her real language, slow and deliberate, looking me in the eye the whole time. So I would understand, she meant it to reach me even if the words didn't. I didn't understand the words. Everything else, I want to be careful here, because the next part is the part people want to make simple. And it wasn't simple. She stayed. Not because she had nowhere to go. I would have helped her go somewhere. A fort, a settlement, someone who would help her find passage east. I would have given her what she needed. I told her this. Standing Rock woman translated it. Badly. Enough. I told her she was free. She could go, she said. Where? I said I didn't know where she wanted to go. She said, I am asking you. Where should I go? I didn't answer right away. And she let the silence sit there, patient, watching me. I said finally, my camp moves south for the winter. Warmer ground. Better hunting. 3 weeks ride. She nodded. I said, you could come. She nodded again. That was the whole conversation. No declaration. No ceremony. Just a woman who had decided something, and a man who had offered a thing honestly, and 2 nods in the lamplight. That was the beginning. The ride south took 4 days, because of her ankle and because the weather came and went. We didn't talk much. The trading tongue gave us enough for practical purposes. Direction, when to stop, how far, and beyond that we were mostly quiet. But it was not the quiet of 2 people with nothing to say. It was the quiet of 2 people taking the measure of something, carefully, the way you circle a fire, to understand its shape before you sit down beside it. On the second night, we camped early because her ankle had stiffened in the cold, and I could see it in the way she was riding. I didn't say anything about it. I just slowed us down and then stopped at a good sheltered spot and made camp. She didn't protest or explain or thank me. She just got down and limped to the fire and sat. And after a while she said, in the trading tongue, pointing at the ankle, not bad, I said. I know. She looked at me. Then something crossed her face, not a smile, something more rueful than a smile. The expression of a person who has been found out in an attempt to be tougher than they are, and knows it. I pretended not to see it. On the 3rd morning she woke before me, which I did not expect. I woke to the smell of the fire built up, and something boiling. She'd found the cornmeal in my pack and made a kind of porridge with the creek water, thick and plain. She had 2 bowls laid out. She was sitting with hers, looking at the trees, waiting. I sat down and picked up my bowl. I said, you didn't have to do this. She said, I know. We ate. Porridge was plain, and it was good. I had not had anyone make me something in the morning, in 4 years. The first months were strange. She moved like water around an obstacle. Careful, quiet, always finding the path of least disturbance. She learned fast. Not because she tried to become one of us. She didn't pretend to be something she wasn't, and my people respected that. But because she paid attention, she watched everything. She remembered everything, and she worked. Standing Rock woman said, At the end of the first month, that Mila worked harder than any woman in camp and complained less than any man, and this was delivered as a very high compliment. She picked up the language in pieces. By spring, she could make herself understood about practical things. By summer, she was telling stories at the fire in a mix of languages and hand sign, and people leaned in to listen because her face when she told a story was worth watching. She had a way of making her face carry half the story, and the two halves didn't always match, which turned out to be funny in ways that surprised people. The thing about Mila, the thing I noticed early and kept noticing, was that she had no pretense in her. None. She had been through something that strips the performance out of people, that takes them all the way down to what they actually are. What she actually was turned out to be someone of considerable interior strength, considerable humor, and a directness that my band found startling at first and then valuable. She said what she thought, clearly, without cruelty, and then she was done with it. She treated the oldest members of the camp with the same directness she used with everyone else, which they found either offensive or refreshing, depending on their temperament. There was an elder, a man called Slow-Water, who was skeptical of her from the first week. He made his skepticism known in the ways older men make things known, not saying much, making the silence particular. One afternoon, I came back from a scout to find Slow-Water and Mila sitting together outside his lodge. He was showing her how to read the grass for weather signs. She was listening with her whole body. When he finished, he asked a question. In our language, badly, but he understood it. And he answered it, and they sat there in the late afternoon light, and nothing was said about how she'd gotten there, or what she was to me, or any of the rest of it. There was a morning, about 2 months after she arrived, when she asked me what my name meant. We were working. She was helping me repair a section of the camp's wind shelter, holding the poles while I lashed them. It was the kind of work that goes better with 2 people and doesn't need conversation, so we'd been at it an hour without talking. And then out of nowhere she said, in the trading tongue, "Chayton, what does this mean?" I said, "A hawk, the bird." She considered this. Then, "Why did they name you that?" I said. "I don't know. My father chose it," he said. "When I was born, I looked like a man who was watching for something." Paused. "I think he meant it as a compliment." She almost smiled. "And did you find it what you were watching for?" "I thought about that," I said. "Some of it. There is always more." She nodded. We went back to work. After a while she said, "Malangi, you want to know what this means?" I said. "Yes," she said. "It means the place where the river bends. In the country I am from, the rivers are very old, and the bends have names, and people who are born near a bend sometimes take its name." She paused. "I was born near a bend in the river. My mother said the bend was very beautiful. The water came around it, slow and smooth, like it had all the time it needed." I said, "A good name," she said. "I used to think so. I have not been near that river in a long time." She said it plainly, not asking for sympathy, just stating a fact about where she was in the world, relative to where she had started. But there was something in the word "used to," a small, complete grief in it, the kind a person carries when they have accepted a loss without quite being done mourning it. I said, "River bends everywhere. You are still what you are." She looked at me. Something passed across her face that I couldn't fully name. Then she turned back to the poles and said, "Hold this one steady." I held it. She lashed it. The shelter held. Slow-Water told me 2 days later that the woman asked good questions. For Slow-Water, this was a formal endorsement. Standing Rock Woman told me that same spring, "This one is trouble." And then she smiled, which meant the opposite. There was an evening in late summer. We were camped near the river, different river, far south of where I'd found her. And the day had been long and hot. And now the heat had gone soft, and the light was doing what plains light does it, the end of a summer day, turning everything the color of old copper and good wood. She was sitting a little apart from the main fire. She had a habit of doing that, not removing herself, just finding the edge of things, She could see everything without being in the center of it. I went and sat near her. We'd gotten comfortable with silence by then. It didn't need filling, she said, in our language haltingly but correctly. Do you think about her? I knew who she meant. I said, yes. She nodded. No follow-up, no redirect. Just the acknowledgement that it was true, and that was allowed. I said, does it trouble you? That I do. She thought about it. Then. She made you what you are. Why would it trouble me? I looked at her. She was looking at the river, at the copper light on the water. Her profile. The cut above her eye long healed. Just a thin white scar now, almost invisible unless the light was right. The scar was visible that evening, I said. You are a strange woman, she said, not turning. You are a strange man. And then she turned and looked at me, and she was not smiling, but her eyes were, took. And I felt something come loose in my chest that I hadn't known was still wound tight, something that had been kept closed for 4 years out of discipline. And the correct priorities of a man who doesn't burden his people with his own grief came loose quietly like a knot finally given enough slack. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she looked back at the river. She moved slightly, so that her shoulder was touching mine, and we sat like that until the light was gone. That fall, a man from a band to the east came to trade. He looked at Milla in a particular way, and asked in a roundabout fashion meant to be diplomatic, whether she was available. I said, no, he said more carefully. Is she? I said, she is mine, without heat, without anger. The way you state a fact that doesn't require debate. The way you describe the sky's color or the direction of north. I told Milla that evening what had been said and what I had said in reply. She was quiet a moment, then, you said that easily. I said, it was easy. She looked at me. Then down at her hands, then up. Good. One word. But the way she said it. I claimed her as the saying went in those days. But I want to be precise about what that means. Because the word carries meanings I don't want, and one meaning I'll stand by. It doesn't mean I owned her. Nothing about Milla could be owned. The river hadn't owned her. The trader hadn't owned her. I certainly didn't. What it means is this. I stood up in front of my people and I said, this woman stands with me. If you have something to say to her, or about her, or against her, you bring it to me first. She is not alone in this world. She has someone who will answer for her and stand beside her. And the thing that most people don't say about a man making that declaration, the thing underneath it, is that it also means he needs something. That for the first time in a long time, he is not only giving, that there is someone who has looked at the thing he is, the tired and hollowed out and functional thing he has made of himself, and said, yes, that one. I'll stand with that one. My people accepted her, not without questions. There were 2 men who said their piece, and were answered, shh, and after that the questions stopped. Because the questions had never really been about her. They'd been about me, about whether I was thinking clearly. And when I gave my answer at the council, it was simple. You have watched me for 11 years. You have never had cause to question my judgment. Give me the same consideration now. They did. Standing Rock Woman gave her blessing by making a considerable amount of noise about having predicted this outcome from the first morning, and being given no credit for it, which was both entirely true and entirely beside the point. And she knew it was beside the point, but she was 80 years old, and had earned the right to be beside the point whenever she chose. The winter that followed was hard. Poor hunting. Cold came early. A neighboring band moved through our territory without asking and took the elk from the eastern valley. Elk we'd been planning to take ourselves. And this created a problem that had to be resolved without blood, because neither band could afford blood that winter, and I spent 2 weeks threading that needle and ended up with a solution that the other chief accepted, and that half my own band resented because it felt like giving ground. I had given ground, because ground is replaceable and people aren't. I knew this. Some of my people knew this. The rest were angry for a month, and then it passed. But there was also something I'd done wrong that winter. A separate thing. a decision about supplies, a miscalculation, one I should not have made. Not catastrophic, correctable, but it cost us 2 weeks of hard going and a horse, and there was nothing I could say except that I had been wrong. Chief, who cannot say that, is a dangerous chief. I had always known this. I had said it to young men who came to me for guidance. It was harder to say it about myself than I had expected. I sat with it at the edge of the camp in the dark, in weather that had no interest in my feelings about it. Clear and very cold, and the stars ridiculous, the way they are on the plains, when there's no cloud cover. That was where she found me. She sat down beside me. She didn't ask what was wrong. The whole camp knew, she said. You did what you thought was right, I said. It wasn't, she said. No. The agreement surprised me. Most people who care about you soften things. She didn't. She said, you were wrong. It costs something. You will be right more than you are wrong. That is what a chief is. I looked at her, she said. I have watched you for more than a year. I know what you are. You are a man who carries the weight of other people and does not ask to be carried in return. A pause. I am telling you that you can ask. Sharing weight is not weakness. It is the difference between carrying alone and carrying together, and together goes farther. I said nothing for a while, then I said, I don't know how to do that. She said, I know. I will show you. And she leaned against me, shoulder against mine. Her head tipped against my neck, and we sat there in the cold dark for a long time. And the weight didn't go away, but it distributed differently, shared between us, and that was something I had forgotten was possible. I had been carrying things alone so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone at the other end of the load. Not carrying for me, beside me. That's not the same thing, and it matters. The spring after that, I have to be careful how I say this next part, because it is the kind of thing that sounds sentimental when it is said wrong, and is not sentimental at all when it is lived. The spring after that was the first spring I had looked forward to in 4 years. Not because anything dramatic had changed. The work was the same. Problems were the same. The land was still what it was, and the people pressing on it were still pressing. But I woke up one morning, in late March when the ice was breaking on the creek, and the geese were beginning to come back, and I lay there for a moment before getting up. And I noticed that the weight in my chest was not what it had been, that it had redistributed itself, that there was something else in there alongside the weight now, something that was not grief and not duty, something quieter than either. It took me a moment to identify it, then I did. Anticipation, the ordinary kind. The kind a person feels when there is someone they want to see that day. I got up and started the fire, and she woke up and pulled the blanket around her shoulders and said, "Good morning" in our language. She had said every morning for the past several months, and which I had answered every morning, and which I never got fully used to. The way you never fully get used to a thing that is better than you expected. She asked me about my children, the ones who had died, the ones who had died. I had not spoken of them to her, not in the specific way she was asking, their names, their ages, what they had been like. I had kept them somewhere interior and private. The way you keep something sacred. She asked for permission, which was not something I was accustomed to being asked about grief. I told her their names, their ages when they died. The one who had been 4, and had her mother's stubbornness, who argued about everything, and was usually right and knew it. The one who had been 2 and very small, and very quiet, who had liked to sit in the crook of my arm just to be there. Not doing anything, just present. That one had known something the rest of us were still figuring out. That it was enough to simply be with someone. That it didn't need to accomplish anything. I got through it without stopping. The last time I'd tried to speak their names, 3 winters before, I had not been able to. When I was done, she said, "Thank you." I said, "For what?" She said, "For trusting me with them." I looked at her and I thought, this woman, this particular woman, from a place I can't pronounce, from a river she didn't fall into, from a life that tried to end her, and didn't. Sitting here on the short grass plains in the spring light, asking me to let her hold the things I've been holding alone. I thought about what I'd said to her that first morning. In words she didn't understand. I am tired of carrying nothing that is mine. I wasn't carrying nothing anymore. I was carrying a great deal. My people, my land, my grief, failures, my decisions, my dead. And beside me, choosing to help carry it, was a woman of considerable interior strength who had looked at the whole of what I was. The hollow and the hard and the tired and the stubborn, and had decided, with the same clear-eyed directness she brought to everything, that yes, that one. She would stand with that one, not because she had to, because she had seen something worth standing with. That summer, a government man came to camp with paper, and a particular expression that meant he had already decided what the conversation would result in, the usual. I had been having versions of that conversation for a decade. I handled it the way I always handled it. Directly, carefully, giving nothing that didn't need to be given. It took 3 days. At the end, the man left with less than he'd come for, but more than he'd expected, which is sometimes the best available position. Mila watched those 3 days from the perimeter. She didn't make herself visible to the government man. Understood without being told that her presence would complicate things. The third evening, when it was done, she came and sat with me. She said, "You did not give him what he wanted." I said, "No," she said. "He will come back," I said. "Yes." She was quiet a moment then. "How do you carry this? Every time?" The same thing, again from another direction. I thought about it. Then I said, "The same way a river carries water. It doesn't hold the water. It just provides the shape for it to move through. It keeps coming. The shape remains." She looked at me, I said. "My father said that," she said. "Your father was a wise man," I said. "He was. He was also stubborn and difficult and argued about everything." She said, completely straight-faced, "Where would you get such a quality?" And that was the first time she made me laugh. Not a polite sound. An actual laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere you forgot you had. She looked pleased with herself in a way she was too dignified to show clearly, which somehow made it funnier. I had not laughed like that since before the sickness. I hadn't known it was still available. My son came to me that same summer and told me he approved of her. He did not say it directly. He said it the way young men who are trying to be dignified say things they feel strongly. Sideways, framed as an observation. He said that, in his opinion, the camp was running well this season. That morale was good. That some things had changed from the previous year in ways that were improvements. I said, "Thank you." He started to say something else and didn't. I said, "Say what you're going to say." He said, "She is good for you." I said, "Yes." He said, "Good." And then he walked away. Pieces. We were Lakota men. And we had now said everything that needed to be said, and anything further would have been excessive. I stood there after he left, and I thought about the fact that I had needed my son to tell me something I already knew, and that hearing him say it had mattered more than I expected. That it had felt, briefly, like something sealed, like the last door coming shut, and all the rooms inside it warm. There is a place, 2 hours' ride from that winter camp, where a high bluff comes out over the river and you can see for a very long distance in all directions. I have been going to that bluff since I was a boy. My father took me there the winter before he died, sat me down on the cold rock with the plains in all directions, and said, "Look at all of this. This is what you are responsible for. Don't be afraid of it, be equal to it." I took Mila there the summer she had been with me 2 years. We rode up in the early morning before the heat. The plains stretched out south and west, brown and gold. The river winding through it, like something thrown down casually and allowed to settle where it liked. Far off, a dark line of trees, the sky very large and very blue. She sat her horse and looked out at it. She didn't say anything for a long time. She had gotten comfortable with big silences by then. She understood that some things don't need comment. Finally she said, in our language, which she spoke well now, Your father brought you here. Not a question. She'd remembered something I'd said in passing, months before, and held on to it. I said, yes, she said. What did he say? I told her. She was quiet. Then, he was right about you. I looked at her. She was still looking out at the plains. Her horse shifted under her. She had her hair loose that morning, and the breeze was moving it. She said, not turning. He told you not to be afraid of it, to be equal to it. Pause. You are. You have been every day I have watched you, even the day you got something wrong. Even the worst of those 3 days, with the government man. You carried it the way he meant you to carry it. Another pause. I want you to know I see that. Not as a person telling you something to make you feel better, as a person saying a true thing that you should know is true. She turned and looked at me. That look. Not the measuring look of the first morning. That had been assessment, the careful evaluation of a person who has learned to be careful. This was past that. This was the look of someone who has done assessment, done it thoroughly, taken a long time to be sure, and arrived at a settled place. Something decided and warmed the way a fire is warm when it has been burning a long time and has gotten down to coals that hold the heat deep and steady without needing to be tended every minute, she said. I see you, Chayton. 3 words. 4 years of quiet undone. I reached across the space between our horses, and I put my hand on the back of her neck, under her hair, and she leaned into it, her eyes closing for a moment. And we stayed like that on top of that bluff with the whole of the plains in front of us, and the sky doing what the plain sky does, being larger than anything you've planned for, larger than your grief and your failures and your long years of carrying alone. She put her hand over mine, pressed it there. Below us the river ran, gray-green, neither frozen nor flooding, just moving, doing what it had always done, indifferent and steady, moving towards something none of us would ever see the end of. I thought of that sound it had made that morning when she hit the ice. I thought about how close it had been. I thought about 60 yards of riverbank and bad timing, and how, if I had been 10 yards further upstream, I might not have heard it. And if I had been already mounted, I might not have reached her before the bend. A man could spend a lot of time on that kind of thinking. I don't, usually. But that morning on that bluff, with her hand over mine and the plains in every direction, I let myself think it. Let myself understand exactly how much had been at stake. In that one moment, how thin the margin had been. And I was glad. Not in a soft, grateful way. In the deep-down, fundamental way of a man who has been given something he didn't know to ask for and knows it for what it is. She opened her eyes and looked at me. I said, I am glad I was standing upstream. She smiled. Not the polite smile. Not the wry smile she used when she was being dry. Something else, full and unguarded. Something she didn't show very often. Something she chose to show me, up here on this bluff, with the plains wide open around us. She said, so am I. People ask me, sometimes, how you know. How you know when something that happened to you, something violent and cold and almost finished you or someone you needed. How you know when that thing was not just a bad day, but the hinge your whole life turned on. I don't have a grand answer for that. I don't trust grand answers. They usually mean someone is selling you something. I have this. She's inside right now. I can hear her moving in the lodge. She's going to call me in a few minutes because the light's going, and she doesn't like to eat alone, and she knows. I've been out here long enough. My people are well. My land is still here, at least enough of it, at least for now. And tomorrow there is work to do about that, and I will do it. And in a little while I'm going to go inside and sit across the fire from a woman who chose to stay. Who looked at the whole of what I was, the grief and the capability, and the stubbornness and the long winters of carrying alone. And chose it. Chose me, not because she had to. Because she had seen something worth standing with. That's a thing a man doesn't forget. I think about the bluff sometimes. About the plains spread out in every direction, and her hand over mine and those 3 words. I see you, Chayton. A man spends a lot of years not being sure of that. Not being sure anyone is looking at him and seeing him rather than seeing what he does, what he provides, what he carries. A chief especially. People need you to be a function as much as a person, and you comply because the need is real, and you are the one who can answer it. And so, you become the function, and you tell yourself that is enough. It is enough. It keeps you going. But it is not the same thing. The same thing is what she gave me on that bluff. Not gratitude. Not dependence. Not the complicated warmth of someone who owes you their life. Just a person, looking at another person, saying, I see what you are, and I find it worth seeing. That is the whole of it. He told you not to be afraid of it, to be equal to it. I hear her now. Time to go inside.